Right, I'm going to start with a coffee. I've been slowly bashing my way through the various round stone blends, and I can say that morning rush is definitely too intense if you have a lot of those in a day. It's actually been a really cool week from a gift point of view, randomly. I got a letter from Graham Mills, who very kindly donated us some spot weld drills that he was no longer needed. But the highlight of this letter was this bit here. He's also thinking about designing some door handles to be machined, as we are on the Mark 1 Escort, in this case for an imp. He said the originals are made of Mazak, which is basically metallic dog shit, which is extremely accurate, as we've found over the years. And also, and I don't know who these came from, but somebody sent us in some Bovril, so very kind, whoever that was. That will that'll last us about a week as the cold sets in. Right, let me have this, get this sorted. It's been an absolutely bonkers week actually, with the IVA test, which I'll come on to in a minute. On Monday. It feels like last week, that much has happened since then. What I should have done is press the button on this before doing all of this. In a sort of good multitasking fashion, but I didn't do that, so now I'm waiting for this coffee to pour with nothing to say other than waffle, which is basically what most of this video is anyway. I'll try and stir. This is my multitasking. I'll stir whilst it's coming out. There we go. Right. Yeah. Okay, let's go. Right, so I'm going to start with lots of vigorous hammering. I'm going to start with Project Norman, the E-Type. So, oh my Jesus Christ. Now normally I'd say the microphone's really close to me, nobody will pick that up, but that is some very vigorous hammering going on. Two avenues on this. You'll know for quite a while now we've been building up to being able to do the rack mounts on it, which are now done. So Jim's got a 3D print on here, happy with the position of it all. He's then gone back to the CAD, made it a little bit more arty, pocketed a bit of weight out here and there on them. They're ready to be machined. And then the other thing we've mentioned before about doing the bracketry for the alternator and aircon compressor, and that had a knock-on effect with some other things at the front here, one of which we wanted to change the water, I'm going to say outlet, but it's inlet to the water pump there, which normally sort of points downwards, and is going to be interrupting our aircon belt run. So we've drawn up a new sort of housing for that, which points straight forward, and we'll actually have a belt going around it, which links in with the other job that James has been on with, which is the upper mount for the aircon compressor, which is also combining with a tensioner. So that with our sort of new belt run, we've got the alternator on one belt over this side, aircon compressor over this side, and then the water pump will be on its own dedicated belt. And then we're putting a sprung tensioner over here so that it keeps a constant tension basically. And conveniently, we can pick up on the strength of the upper mounting point on this side, which is the upper mount for our aircon compressor. But positionally, it's really good for fitting a sprung tensioner in here. So we've used a tensioner from an VW Audi group tensioner that's readily available, not expensive, and known to be reliable in there. And that's going to be the third belt on there. So essentially everything's on its individual belts, but it keeps everything nice and low down. So yeah, pretty happy with all of that. I think that's sort of the bulk of the billet components from around the engine now. So we're just going through finalising those drawings and getting those sent off to be machined at the moment. The sort of other main one is whether we might do a sort of reservoir here to replicate the brake servo, the brake reservoir pedal box mount that side. But we need to determine whether there's going to be any aircon components in this area first. So that's where we're at with that. George has carried on with his sort of segment design for creating a guide for sanding the changes that are going to be on the bonnet before we get it moulded. He's finished all the drawing work for that now, so it's just got to get busy with the plasma cutter, cut all the segments out, get those tacked onto the bonnet, and then the bodywork guys can take over on that and start sculpting all the changes on that. So that's where we're at with that. The Morris, Scott is just on with, I'll sneak over here actually. Scott's just on with the one finishing piece on the transmission tunnel where the gear shifter comes through. There's kind of a rectangular section of tunnel that's open, And we just need to make a closing piece for that that just keeps the weather out basically and minimises the noise. And then there is a console that goes over it again with a cosmetic gaiter on, but we'll have a lower piece that he's making with just a weatherproof gaiter on there. And that's kind of the last piece we needed to do before the centre console goes in. So as soon as he's done that, we can get the console in and start piecing the interior together. So that's going pretty well. John's just on with the reservoir, literally in the background there. He's just fitting the O-ring cord on the reservoir front capping pieces, because once we've got those on, we can fill and bleed the brakes. So that's quite exciting, the prospect of getting one of the hydraulic systems sort of actually bled and functioning. I've also got the dimensions over to Nitron last week, so they can crack on with getting the dampers built for it, which are very similar to normal MX-5. The rear is essentially standard MX-5 with a very slight alteration to the length, that's longer actually. The front has got a different mounting detail at the top. It's shorter, but it's not so short that it doesn't mean we can run the spring platform above the wishbone. For those unfamiliar with an MX-5, the coilover basically goes through the middle of the upper wishbone. Because it's quite a small hole in the upper wishbone, with a 2 1/4 inch spring, it needs to sit above the wishbone, it can't go through the hole. So as you go shorter with the damper, the chances of that happening reduce, but we're at the point where we can still run a decent length spring that won't go coil bound in there, so all looking good on that. There was a little concern at the back of our minds as to whether we might need to go down to a 1.9 inch spring and run it through the wishbone, but it wasn't necessary, so that was a good outcome on that. Onto Mustang, which there's been quite a bit of progress with actually. Bobby's been on with the tracking, so he's done all the alignment on it now. We've done the headlamp alignment. It's always a good sign when you're getting to little details like this. We've got a spare set of Recaros in it onto the subframes that we made, so we can drive it in lieu of having the actual final seats, although I believe they're going to be done by this weekend anyway, so it may be that we don't need them and we can just swap the final one straight in. I think we've been just fettling the tread plates that we've got for the sills. It's got these nice sort of, I guess they're aluminium, not stainless steel, but these metal tread plates that finish the sill off. But the ends don't really quite follow the curve of the body, so we're just doing a little bit of fettling on those. And yeah, I think we're going to be just about ready to give it a test drive. Jim, before he disappeared, was just measuring up for a plate we're making across here. Just not that happy with this area, the look of this area here. We've got the wiring loom here, which is great from an accessibility point of view, but it doesn't look great to the eye, and we also wouldn't mind having something here to force all of the radiator grill air through the radiator rather than allowing it to escape over the top. So we're going to make a plate up that essentially covers over this area, has a step down just in front of here, and then a flat section that comes all the way forward to the top of the grill to basically close in that area and just make it look a bit more visually pleasing and force all the radiator air through the radiator itself. Yeah, that one's looking good as well, so exciting on that. I'm going to loop around here. Land Cruiser. So Monday, Bobby was just testing the electric handbrake system on it, making sure essentially it has enough pull and the adjustments right. I think he made a couple of little tweaks on the bracketry for that, and that lot's going to go away for plating now, but I believe he's happy with how that's gone. And also Alistair, who you saw a couple of weeks ago 3D scanning everything in the engine bay, he's just on with the design work for that inlet manifold now. Looking good actually. He's essentially assembled together the scan of the engine, the throttle body with the filter on it, and the bonnet, and then kind of positioned it with the minimal amount of clearance we'd want. I think 12 mil between the air filter and bonnet, which gives us the most space to fit the manifold in, and then he can essentially, now he's got that manifold floating in free space in CAD, he can design the manifold to join the two. So that's the next thing on that. And then the wiring loom, I believe, will be with us tomorrow, so it's Thursday, Friday, 2 days ago if you're watching this on Sunday. So that will be great because we can get that in then, and that then opens up all of the electrical testing work, and we can also start buttoning up some of the interior panel work which we've left off to allow us to get the wiring in. So that's that. And Stratos. So Monday we took this for IVA. It failed primarily on noise, which, to be honest, was our biggest concern. Not by a lot though, so we've made a revision on the exhaust. We've actually got a retest booked this coming Monday. and I'm pretty happy now. The revision we've made has made a very obvious night and day difference to it, so I'm pretty confident because we were close anyway. The other things were mainly niggly things that we could have sorted there. The steering lock didn't work, but then when we got the car back here, it did work. So I think it may just be that the tester didn't turn the wheel far enough. To avoid that possibility again, we've changed the position of the inner column so that it locks at dead centre rather than off to one side. The side door windows, they were actually supplied, they were plastic ones, they were supplied with the Stratos kit. But they didn't have any E-markings on, which we didn't realise because we'd left some of the protective film on and I assumed they were under there. But they failed because there was no E-marking. Now, as a handy side effect of that, I spoke to Lister Bell again, and since we bought this kit, because this project's been with us a long while, they've actually done a glass side window now. And the plastic windows, to be honest, were one of the things I felt most disappointed with or most unhappy with on the car, because they just didn't have the same feel as the rest of it. So we've now got the glass side windows. They made some changes to the mouldings for the doors regarding mounting those. So we're making some changes on these doors. We've just plasmed out some little plates to mount like a billet boss that forms the pivot for the window. But this one's just about done. I'm just about to start on the other one, but that's really transformed the feel and look of the car now, having glass windows on the side. So although an IVA fail, actually a handy side effect in that the end result is better now anyway, and we have got the E-marking on the glass here. I'm trying to think what else there was. I think anything else was just minor things. Oh, the rear reflectors, which are on the tail lights, they need to be visible with all of the sort of opening parts of the car open, so that includes the rear clamshell, and because it opens quite a long way, they face down and you can't see them. But they said actually if we just limit the travel of the straps on the rear clam so it doesn't open as far, that will then still pass, so that's what we're doing on that. So yeah, I'm going to get that other window done. Monday this will be going for a retest, fingers crossed, all passed, and then we can get the registration sorted and won't be long till it's on the road. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Nat. Don't forget there's mugs available in the shop. Very soon we're going to have some new t-shirts as well. I don't know if they're going to be in the shop in time for this weekend, but very shortly I'll unveil the new t-shirts. So over to Nat in the metal workshop.
Well, hello folks, thanks Cal for passing over, and here we are in the metalwork zone for another week of Retro Power Uncut. My swift introduction there. We'll start with the second Mark 1 Escort project. I've forgotten the name again.
TBC?
I can't remember now what this was called. Anyway, the second Mark 1 Escort that we're working on. And interestingly, we had a visit yesterday from the customers, the brothers who we're building these two cars for, which was nice. It was good to see them and have a little catch up and show them where we were at. And to that end, we're doing a little bit, again, as I mentioned, I think last time, we're not really pushing ahead too hard with the metalwork on this body shell at the moment. We're really pushing ahead with the first one at the moment. However, in between many other tasks that Rich has been up to, he's got a little bit of time available, so we're just getting some work done on the front end of this while we can, in terms of stripping off the old inner wings, because we now have the replacements. They've come from Ian Evans at Evans & Son Rally Spares. So we've got the inner wings to go on, and we've got some little bits of repair work to do before the inner wings can go on. So Rich has just been templating up the sections to repair the very ends of the scuttle. Most of the scuttle is actually in really good condition, but there was just a few slightly frilly edges. So he's made the sections to repair the ends of the scuttle, and a little return piece to put a new flange onto the top of the splash panel here, on top of the A panel, and the other side similar. It needs just a new top putting on here. It's not actually very bad. There's just a couple of slightly grotty bits on it and a couple of little pinholes. So we're just going to replace those two end sections of the bulkhead and the very top flange of the A panels, just so that's all nice and fresh. before we go to put the new inner wings on. Obviously all bolted to the jig as you'll have seen before, but it's a bit more obvious now the inner wings are off. You can see the turret locators which pick up exactly where the inner wing turret tops have got to be. These which pick up the old, what Ford referred to as a companion hole on the front of the chassis rail, and then this locator here bolts through, as you can see, the captive nuts for the front crossmember location. That's all bolted into place, nothing can move, inner wings are off, and as I say, the next step on that, once those repairs are done, will be putting the inner wings on. But as I say, this is going to be picked up and put down a little bit at the moment until we're clear of the metalwork on the other shell. So we'll wander this way. A few people have asked about this, so I'll pick up on this. In fact, this is my own. I think a while back I mentioned about an autograss in our little series of Meet the Team. In my interview I mentioned about an autograss car and that I was going to do a new one. And to that end, the first pieces needed to be able to enable the start of the build of that car are the body shell, which is just a skin shell. It's not structural, it literally is just a skin of steel panels that hangs over the top. Pretty much everybody, this is a Class 7 autograss car, it will be a Class 7 autograss car, pretty much everybody runs a mini pickup shell just for practical reasons, in that the front end panels are easily available, the rear end panels are a simple shape, easy to replicate and really easy to repair, and being a pickup enables access to the mechanicals which are in the back. It will be mid-engined, or rear mid-engined basically. It will be running a transverse engine in the back. I'm going to leave the engine, actually I think I've mentioned, I don't know if I've mentioned it before or not, basically it's going to be a transverse LS3 V8 in the back, driving a GBZ transmission, which is an autograss transmission that's sort of manufactured by Jeff Beresford, GB Engineering. It will be using one of his transmissions. It's a 2-speed dog engaged gearbox. Mounted to the LS3, transverse in the back, tube frame chassis with this Richard Cooper RC Race Fab manufactured body shell sort of dropped over the top basically. To enable the beginning of the construction of the chassis, we need a body shell, an engine and a transmission, and at the moment the transmission's the bit I'm waiting for. Once I've got the transmission, all of that will be going to the man who is doing the chassis, who will be who I'll introduce on another occasion. That's not being done here, that's being done for me by another guy who's quite keen to do it, so I'll introduce him on another occasion, but that's why that's here anyway. It's nothing to do with, it's not a retro power project, it's my own, but it's here waiting while I get the other parts to enable the chassis to be built. Moving on to actual retro power work, we'll come round to here, and Stu, who's currently beavering away at the back of the Churchill Jag, has been very busy as always on the body shell on this, and things are starting to come together now. It's quite, obviously they've been coming together for a long time, but you may notice here we have quarter panels attached. He's leapt in and got onto that, but before that, transmission tunnel. Last week, Stu had made the rear section reinforcer which carries the prop shaft centre bearing just in there, and the captive nut plates and pieces for that. That's a double skinned reinforcer section there. He's now, this week, made the front section. He's cut I think I mentioned last time, he's cut these seat boxes back, both sides, to widen the space available underneath to enable the gearbox crossmember to fit. He's then remade again, this is like a double skin bridge section, if you like a humpback bridge. And the underside carries the gearbox crossmember, and the top side then reinforces it and finishes it off, and also provides a lip for the rest of the tunnel to attach to. And then he's made the tunnel to go in between the two. Found a reasonably neat solution for merging that with the existing floor. Because of the fluted floor, it's quite hard to do a neat merge of that tunnel with the floor, so we kind of decided on a way of doing that. That's done. That's all pretty neat and nice and all works and fits. Transmission fits. We've got clearance for the prop fits, centre bearing fits. That's all going to go together nicely. The heights work out, the prop routing all works out nicely, so that's all done. And then, as I say, he's then moved on to quarter panel fitment. Both sides I think are now getting towards done. I think this side's well dressing to do, and then really the next big job is lead work and then metal finishing. There's quite a lot of panel beating to do. Now it's all pinned in place and it can't go anywhere. He's got the option to do the final metal finishing on all of it, because obviously there's various high and low spots that at the point when the panel's just loose, you can't really do a lot about them. But once it's actually fitted in place, then you can chase all those bits around and basically feel like you're going round and round and round in circles for quite a few days trying to get all the panel the right shape. It's a pretty frustrating and time-consuming job, that part. I doubt it's something still I've been looking forward to. It's certainly not something I would look forward to. It's a bit of a drag, but it always has to be done at in the final stages. We've got the same to do on the doors as well, getting them all to the sort of final stage where they're fit for body prep. But yeah, it's nice to see now with quarter panels on, looking really quite smart. The shape is, you can actually get the idea of the shape of the car when you get to this stage, and it really is going to be quite a thing. The other thing, as I think I mentioned before, is that the car is very high up, obvious, to state the obvious. It's very high up on this jig. When it's actually down on the floor at ride height, the roof height's incredibly low. You know, this section of roof here is kind of down at my hip height when the car's on the road at ride height. It's a ridiculously sleek thing. So it's going to be a really impressive car. Stu's just working at the moment on the very back end of the quarter panels, finishing off where he'd jigged the light apertures through the quarters. Obviously now he's actually fitting the quarters on. He's got to finish weld the areas around where the light apertures go through the panels. So he's just, I can see he's got his trusty tail light alignment jig to hand, which he made for making sure the lights are on the correct spacing, equal to centre line and level. Because it's always quite hard to do that when they're sort of socketed through the car structure. It's easy to get them on a slight angle, which doesn't seem much at the time, and then later on when it's got lights in it, it'll look terrible. So he's got all that, made a little jig to make sure they're sitting square and level. I think that's pretty much where we're at on this. I need to order a steering column for it, which I keep forgetting to order. We're going to use an X300 tilt and telescopic adjustable manual adjusting steering column in this, and I need to get that ordered because that's going to be a key part of the sort of next stages once Stu gets back onto working on the dash area and the HVAC installation and all that stuff. So yeah, that's where we're at on that. I think I'll reverse Jamie back a bit and we'll wander around to the Martin Escort, where I think Tom's not actually at it at the minute because I could hear the CNC plasma running a second ago. Tom's actually cutting out some bits for the inside. But before we move on to that, the bits that will have changed since last week is Tom's finished the boot floor installation. I think last week he was making the boot floor, wasn't he? I think you got a bit of, I think we got some footage of him making the boot floor section last week. That's now all fitted, metal finished, tidied up, all cleaned up and all ready and done. And all the little titivating bits around the edges have done, and there was some slack. The original boot floor had stretched a little bit between wear and tear, things being thrown in the boot and then being blasted. It had just stretched it because it was very thin. So he's put a couple of tucks in that, shrunk them and welded them back together just to make sure that the boot floor is all neat and tidy at the back, because it was a little bit wavy, that edge where we'd cut that. Then I think, again, last week I'd possibly done the blank. I think I'd just done the blank for the parcel shelf and then handed the blanks. I handed all the hard bit over to Tom, basically. I think I drew them up and cut them and then handed the hard bit to Tom. Tom's put some reinforcing pressings in them. Again, I'd done the blanks for the sides. Tom's shaped them, put the folds on them, put the joggles in them, and then put the reinforcers under these. Then I'd also drawn up the I don't know if we covered that last week, that might have been this week, drawn up the blanks for the reinforcers that sit between the parcel shelf and the rear turret tops, because that sort of doesn't seal it in, literally sealing it watertight, but it seals in structurally the turret tops into the parcel shelf to tie everything in structurally together. So there's a flanged extension on the top of the turrets under here, which is actually spot welded, plug welded, sorry, onto the rear parcel shelf. I drew those up in CAD because it's quite a complicated shape. It's quite difficult to template under there. It's very difficult to reach in with the cardboard. So after a couple of false starts, I managed to get that drawn up. And so as I say, it's a very strange shape when it's unrolled, but we've done that, flat patterned it, CNC plasmid it out. All of these parts are CNC plasmid blanks. They're all drawn on CAD, so that when we do the second car, I've either already cut the blanks for all of these parts, or we already have the CAD to cut the blanks. Most of the time I've been trying to cut both sets of blanks at once, but if I wasn't certain they were going to fit, I'd only cut one set. But when I know that they do, after a drawing tweak or two or whatever was necessary, we've got the drawing, so when we do the next car, we can just cut all the pieces out and we haven't got to draw them again or pattern them again. So yeah, they're all done. Tom's done all the final shaping, got everything welded in, the parcel shelves all welded in. He's just this morning finished off the 2 final pieces of the rear bulkhead, which were the sections either side above the wheel arch, the final blanks outboard of the turrets. So that's now done. So we're now moving on to the I'm trying to think what you would call it. Originally on the Escorts, it would have been the rear seat cross member, the point where on a 4-linked Escort, the link boxes would be welded in to the original seat cross member. On this, obviously, none of that exists anymore. And we've got, that's partially now made up from the rear tunnel sort of extension wings, if you like, where we've made room for the silencer and for the front mountings for the rear subframe. And it's partly made up by a part that will be up inside the car as a little bulkhead, which is going to go across and tie in to the main roll hoop. The main roll hoop's actually just leaning against the wall over there by Jamie. That's the other thing I did at the beginning of this week is, I think the tail end of last week, I drew up the dimensions on CAD for the roll bar and just checked the fit and everything, made sure it was going to be right, and then I've bent the tube up for that. As I say, it's just a very simple little rear, it's just a main hoop and 2 rear stays, and then the harness bar, which is already in the car, all in 1.5 inch, 12 gauge, ROPT 510 from Proformers Metals. It's just a seamless tube, very simple. It's not a full cage, it's not MSA approved or anything like that. It's just to add a little bit of added safety to the shell, but also be quite tucked out of the way and not cause any problems with space or anything like that. The customers don't want full cages, these are road cars. They just wanted a little bit of extra safety. So the roll hoop will go in. That's the feet for that are some 3mm plate feet which are welded in, which are also going to tie into this bulkhead section that Tom's working on. As I say, Tom's just through at the CNC plasma at the minute. I drew the bits up for the sides of that bulkhead this morning. He's just cutting those out, and also while he's cutting, I've also drawn up. You may remember from the other sections we've done there, a little press tool. We'll cut another press tool out of 3mm steel, and we'll emboss some reinforcement into that little bulkhead section, which sort of mimics the embossings. That, in fact, one of the embossings is exactly the same shape, and the other one's a slightly edited version of it. Of the embossings that are in the 2 halves of that rear tunnel extension that's there now, these will basically carry on that same embossing theme across that bulkhead section, so it all looks neat and tied together in terms of design. Then towards the front, Scott's been working on finishing the, well, I say finishing, it's not quite finished yet. There's a couple of things which I mentioned last week, but basically getting as far on as he can with the slam panel and getting that all tidied up and sanded off and the corners cleaned, and he's TIG welded the returns on the front panel. In fact, I'll come and point at it. Jamie can come up here and I'll point at it as I do it, because it'll be easier. It'll be a memory jog for me and it'll be clearer for you. For you viewers, these returns here, Scott's TIG welded on these returns. I think he might have done that last week, but he's now tidied all the corners and sanded these off, so these look really super neat now around here. This is all sanded off. The returns spot welded in there. I can't remember whether that was done last week or not. The whole thing's screwed in place, but we do have some more work to do on this before it can be actually finally fitted, which again, I think I mentioned this last week, but we're going to do some pressed returns here. Pressed, embossed pieces, really. They're going to actually be welded in. They'll be pressed separately and then welded in. A piece there and a piece there, which will be in billet stainless. So we'll do our own bonnet catch mechanism in billet stainless that goes in there, and then a striker frame for the original safety catch type, the original design of safety catch to engage with, so we don't hit the paintwork and we're not damaging the slam panel. The original design basically used painted parts as contact parts and relied on grease to stop them rusting, which isn't particularly, it's a very, very good design from Ford's point of view. It's really simple. Literally, the bonnet catch is a work of art. It literally has one moving part. Which is, well, I suppose 2 if you count the spring on the striker. The actual part on the car is just a spring, which is also the catch. You literally couldn't get simpler. Our revision to that is going to be that rather than mounting directly into the slam panel and damaging the paint, is going to mount into a billet stainless piece that also has a little bit of adjustment, which will then be dropped into a recess that sways into here so that it doesn't raise the height any. So that's that. And then Scott's been working on, I probably won't be able to get it out now on camera without ragging it around. We've got the 3D printed dry sump tank in place, and then Scott's been working on the recess in the inner wing to enable fitting the dry sump tank into the inner wing here. So he's got 3/4 of that done. We've got a bit more to do at the front, but to do that we've got to take all the front panel off, and he's actually moved on. He's doing a bit of work on the Morris Minor at the moment, so when he comes back to this, it'll be a case of take the outer front panel off and the slam panel off, and that'll give access to finish off welding this section into the inner wing that accepts the dry sump tank here. As I think we mentioned before, the dry sump tank, this top piece is billet, the piece it attaches to immediately underneath it is billet, and then there's a fabricated section, then a bulkhead plate with a hole in it, which is like a baffle, that's the word, and then another fabricated section, then a billet section right at the bottom. The second billet section here has like a centrifuge track machined into it, and then I roll an aluminium cone which I'll weld to the underside. It's basically the same design as I did for Gordon's car, where I'll roll an aluminium cone that will be TIG welded to the underside of the centrifuge track in this second billet section. And then the oil returning from the dry sump pump goes through the cooler, which will be in the bottom of the radiator, and then across and into the centrifuge track in there where it's de-aerated, drops onto the baffle out of the bottom of that cone inside the tank, drops onto the baffle, and then runs across the baffle and drops through a big hole in the baffle, which then goes back into the tank. So that's what's knocking the air out of the oil in the tank. And then the fitment of the tank at the top, it sits on 2 bolts at the bottom, well, it's actually 2 pins at the bottom that go into sockets on the plate on top of the chassis rail, which is the same plate that would normally be the anti-roll bar mount. We changed that plate, and that has 2 sockets in it for pins on the bottom of the tank, and then it's held at the top by a threaded fitting, which goes in, I think it's 5/8 UNF off the top of my head, which goes into this billet piece here. We put a hole through the inner wing, that pulls that up with a pair of washers, mounts the top of the tank against the inner wing there, and then on the other side of that same fitting we screw another female fitting onto the other end, and that fits a breather tank which is mounted under the inner wing. So under here it's quite a shallow but fairly long breather tank, so that the breathing from the engine comes out of here into the breather tank under there, and then that's got a little stone protector, so it's like a spaced off stone protector under it to stop stones damaging the bottom of the tank, and then there's also a facility to drain that tank when it needs draining. So that's all the setup there, and I think, trying to think what else has been done. Oh, we've done a little fettle of the bulkhead to clear the air filter. That needed, was a job that had been put on the back burner, but that's done now. So yeah, I think that's pretty much where we're at on Project 1 Escort, forging ahead with that really. We're sort of getting to the point where we can do a list of outstanding jobs now. That list isn't so long that we lose track of it, so we're getting to that stage now. I'll fiddle through this way, I think, and we'll head on round here to the body shop area, and I've made Jaguar's life really difficult squeezing through a narrow gap. No loud noises. And into the body shop where everybody loves E-types. I think everybody's favourite car in here is an E-type at the moment. We have been battling bumpers. This time we've been battling a combination of aftermarket chromium plated parts and bumpers, and the sort of strange setup that Series 2 and 3 E-types have, where they have chrome bumpers and then a rubber infill which sort of acts as a disguise bodge around the edges of the bumpers. Because the bumpers don't really fit the car, Jaguar put a sort of a rubber strip around them, which I think
more of a skirt.
More of a skirt than a strip. It's more like a hovercraft skirt. In fact, here is a piece of it. It sort of is more like a hovercraft skirt than a strip. And there's that as well. That's the other one. And they really are not the prettiest things. And they. It just looks a bit rubbish, to be quite honest. But anyway, we've been fettling the bumpers to the exact shape for the car so that we can fit those rubber strips. One of the, apparently, you know, it's kind of generally regarded as the thing that one has to do when restoring one of these, is that the bumpers are basically fitted to the car. and they're ground to the profile of the car before chrome plating, which is fine. And that's what we've been doing. But it's quite unnerving, you know, the amount of difference that these must have, one car to another, and the amount of bumper that has to be changed to make it fit. And I just can't, I can imagine if you're at the extremes of tolerance of the bumper manufacturer and the body manufacturer at the point that one of these cars was actually made by Jaguar, I can't imagine that there'd be enough adjustments simply by grinding the bumper. I don't actually know how they ever made them fit. But anyway, we've got them to fit, we've got them to a really acceptable condition. It would be nice to fit them without the rubbers, but they originally had the rubbers, so we will be fitting them with them. So yeah, we've got that to a reasonable stage. We've drilled the bumper mounting holes that were removed at the point where the metalwork was done on the car. There's a couple that were taken out at that point that needed putting back in when we got as far as being able to fit the bumpers. So that's been done. I'm trying to think what else I've missed that we've been doing. Basically lots and lots of fitting, an awful lot of fettling of the bonnet to scuttle fit again, because every time you take the bonnet off and put it back on, and every time you take the front frame off the body shell and put it back on, the bonnet to scuttle fit goes completely out of the window, and you basically have to readjust everything to get it all to line up again. And we're aware that that process is still probably a couple of iterations away from finished, because we know that as soon as the frame goes on the neck for the final time, for final paint, then it will need adjusting again. And then when the engine goes in, we will have to take the bonnet off again to put the engine in. When the engine goes in, that'll tweak everything again. The added weight on the frame will then move everything again. So there's certainly at least 2 more rounds of battle of the bonnet before we have a finished car, or finished car in terms of finished paint. Because I believe certainly the plan as was, and I believe it's still the plan, is to paint the bonnet on the car with the rest of the car, but chocked open, to give us a chance of making sure that we get the same finish on everything. But it just makes the masking strategy needs careful thought. In the same way as, again, we covered before on the bonnet, the masking strategy and the paint sequence strategy is quite complex, in that we wanted to get paint on all the surfaces that would be impossible to paint once the bonnet was assembled. Now on a Series 1 that wouldn't be quite so bad, because all the parts could be assembled with the insides painted. It's what we did on this, but obviously on the Series 2, well not obviously, but to those uninitiated, on the Series 2 and 3, on the Series 1 there's a trim down here where this panel joint is between the centre section and the wing sections of the bonnet. On the Series 2 and 3 there isn't. That's either brazed or welded up. On this car I TIG brazed it. But that's a brazed joint there now, so when you do that you immediately burn off any coating that you've put on the back of that. Now we've hand recoated the back of that after that operation so that it is all coated, and every other joint on it is painted through the joint so that we know that there's no unprotected areas of material under the car, which I dare say is a lot better than they were originally. But it does just add an enormous amount of time to the job, because you have to unassemble and reassemble that whole lot several times, and every time you do it all the adjustments go to crap basically. But it is there now, and it doesn't now need to come apart again. In fact, it can't come apart again because that joint is joined. But yeah, that's why it's now on its own dedicated trolley. That's again, the guys in here yesterday were building a little buggy for it, so that can stay on its buggy when it's not on the car, so it's all safe. It's not going to get knocked over. It's bolted on, so no accidents can occur. Well, hopefully can't occur. So that's that. And the next stage, I think, is epoxy next. Yeah, basically for the bonnet and the car, polyester's all blocked. That's all down to 320. We're all on 320 on bonnet and the shell, and they're doing the final sort of pre-paint masking round, hopefully, all being well, which is for the epoxy high build. Lots of people keep asking. I can't actually remember what that what's the number of the epoxy we use? Can't remember the number. Basically, it's a Celemix epoxy primer that we use. They make 3 different, to our knowledge anyway. Celemix make 3 different epoxy primers. There's one which is a general purpose epoxy primer. They then do a high build anti-corrosion epoxy primer, primer, and then they do a very high build, very anti-corrosion primer, which is really aimed at marine industry. The intermediate one, I think, is mainly aimed at marine industry, but that's what we generally use. Quite a few people ask about it. If you go on Celemix's website and look up epoxy primers, it's the middle one of the three, and I can't remember what the actual number is on it. That's the one we use. It's a reasonably high build, probably not quite as high build as an acrylic high build, but it doesn't sink like acrylic high build. It's very, very stable once it's on, once it's gone off. It's extremely stable and doesn't sink. And that's the only high build primer we use at all. It's not really technically a high build. It's an epoxy sealer that's also got high zinc content for anti-corrosion, but it does give us the final bit of build to block back, because we do also still wet block. Once that epoxy's on, we will wet block that epoxy. We don't put any water anywhere near any of this until it's sealed in with that epoxy. At that point, we will do the final blocking wet. Lots of people say that's old-fashioned. It probably is, but that's what we like doing. That's the processes that we get on with, so that's what we do. So yeah, the next stage will be, once all this masking marathon, the latest round of masking marathons done, then it'll be epoxy on, wet block that, and then hopefully at that point we'll be ready for the final paint processes. So yeah, that's coming together quite nice. There's been various other sort of little jobs coming and going through here, but yeah, basically the main focus of the week has been the battle of the chrome and the battle of the bonnet. And yeah, hopefully be ending the week with some primer. So yeah, until next time, we shall see you again then.